Welcome to the Geek Homeworld. I am your host, SavageTechman. We talk sci-fi, TV, movies, superheroes, and all from a geek perspective. You can find us on Blogger, Google+, Twitter, Facebook. We're everywhere. Join the Geek Homeworld. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Geek Homeworld podcast. I'm your host, Ciucevich, aka SavageTechman. This is a special episode that is celebrating our 3-year anniversary of the Geek Homeworld podcast. Yay! We don't have any special guest or anything on today for this episode. I'm just going to talk about a little history of what got me here and some of the milestones, accomplishments that I've had, some of the great people I've met through podcasting, and a little bit about my background there in podcasting and looking at the present and, of course, the future. So just sit back and listen for a while, and hopefully you'll enjoy this episode. Maybe you'll draw some inspiration. I certainly have gotten inspiration from other podcasters in the field. I grew up wanting to be in radio, and it's led to this passion of just expressing myself through podcast. And I produce, direct, I do everything, okay? Top to bottom, record, post-production, everything on the podcast here. It's all done in-house in studio here by myself. And I have learned over the years how to do it better. I've gotten over time better equipment. And in the new career that I'm doing now in movies as a sound mixer, professional sound mixer, I'm using some of that good quality right now. So hopefully you're hearing a better sound. If you listen to some of my earlier podcasts way back, and I'm about to get into the history of me podcasting and what brought me into this foray of wanting to podcast and finding my own unique voice that we all have, in podcasting. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But if you have something to say, if you feel something that you really want to express, then you definitely ought to start a podcast. And if you're not podcasting, you should join the revolution. It's been going for some years, really big since mainly 2005, 2006. My journey started, I tried one podcast. I did like an episode. It really didn't go anywhere. And I retooled everything essentially and started what was known as the Geek Homeworld. Excuse me. That's the current podcast. I'm getting ahead of myself, as I always do. But that was the Digital Man Cave podcast. And we ended up doing, I think, 150 episodes. And it's still available on Libsyn.com, digitalmancave.libsyn.com, and it's also on iTunes. And all of the podcasts I'll mention are available on Libsyn, which is a great service if you haven't thought about a good hosting site for your podcast. That's one of the things you need to consider. I know a lot of people are doing video. I have not done video. I didn't know who would want to look at this mug of mine, but I'm thinking of venturing into video. I have friends that are doing that. They do similar formats of podcast, and that's fine. There's room for all of our voices out there. Just like in the movie industry, there's room for all of us and all of you. So join us on this journey here as we talk about podcasting, and I'm going to focus, of course, on that. So let's go back, like I said, to about 2005, 2006 is when podcasting started to become a thing. It got real popular by 2008. I had the one little effort I tried and didn't really go anywhere, didn't know even how to promote a podcast back then or anything like that. But 2008 came along and I started. It was a friend of mine, my friend Anthony. He's actually Digital Caveman with 2 N's on Twitter. And he and I were just, and some other friends that we've had along the way on the podcast. And anyway, we just would sit around and talk, and we, about this and that, and we'd talk about movies mainly, and we'd geek out over stuff like that. And I've always been a big geek without knowing it, a nerd that became a geek. And no, we're not nerds, we're geeks. There's a difference, okay? And so don't call us a nerd, call us geeks, okay? So 2008, I started the Digital Man Cave podcast, and and I've mentioned this on previous episodes or probably previous podcasts too, I think on the Digital Man Cave podcast. And there was also an episode on Geek Homeworld, this current podcast, where I think it's called Passion Through Podcasting. And so I kind of rehash a lot of this, the history or whatever of me podcasting. But I always wanted growing up to be on a radio station, and, I still wouldn't say no to that, but I'm working in the movie industry now as a professional sound mixer, so yeah, I'm having fun. That's what I'm loving. That's my passion that I found, and I still have my passion for podcasting, so audio has always kind of been my thing, So that's probably why I didn't really venture into the video portion of things yet, because I wasn't really ready for it, or it's just easier to do an audio podcast. And yeah, years ago I could have done a video podcast. I'd probably be cringing at some of the video now, but I don't know. We have a YouTube channel here for the podcast and everything. But back in 2008, a lot of that was, it was still new, and podcasting's grown. It had its boom, and then it kind of leveled off a little bit. But now there's people out there that are making buku bucks, a very small group, but there's a big group of entrepreneurs out there that, with social media exploding how it has, how it pretty much is part of our lives. It's an integral part of our lives. It's really hard to be cut off from any kind of social media for an extended period of time. I mean, there's actually a syndrome, I think, on that, and I don't remember what it's called, but, I think I've suffered from it myself when I essentially went offline for a while and here and there. And yes, you do need to step away from it from a while. It's kind of like writing. You have it in your blood, so you never stop writing. You just don't always write, or if you do write, you don't think it's some of your best stuff. It's like, I'm also a poet, so haven't really written any significant poetry in a long time, but I was really into it for a while and had a lot to say. And so I'm pretty much an outgoing person, so I want to get my point across and all that. I do value other people's opinions, obviously, but, I am a very talkative person, as it were. So naturally, I would just sit around and talk. And for a while at first, podcasting, and I've had some friends that I was trying to get into podcasting a long time ago. And I remember saying to one of them, trying to explain podcasting is the first thing, what is a podcast? And they were, it was so funny because they said, well, you're just kind of talking to yourself, aren't you? I'm like, well, no. Well, yes and no. I mean, yes, I am. I'm talking into a microphone and a recording device, etc. And I'm putting it up on a website where people can download it at their leisure on their iPods or whatever you download and now stream stuff. So it is kind of talking to yourself. And so people think you're crazy, but they can hear you. That's the good thing. So, it's getting those voices out. There's been serial soap opera type of podcasts now that pull in bukus of listeners. The sky is the limit right now. The time is just ripe for everybody to have their 15 minutes or 15 years of fame. So this is not a stab at fame. It would be nice, but this is just a expression. It's something I do, and it's, podcasting is, I'm a podcaster. I podcast, therefore I am. It's like, I'm a sound mixer, therefore I am. So when I was doing the Digital Man Cave podcast 8 years ago, we're talking about 2008. Let me tell you what was going on. We were major fans, in fact, of The Dark Knight, which is still probably one of the best superhero movies. And me and my friends, we'd all gather around and talk. We go watch a movie and then spend hours talking about the movie. And I said, wouldn't that be nice? Had toyed around with the podcast, and I was at my friend's house, and he has a wonderful upstairs part of his house where he has every Star Wars battle recreated and in detail with all of the, droids and everything from and stormtroopers from Star Wars. Major Star Wars fan. He's read all the extended universe books, et cetera, et cetera. So he's a fellow geek like me, a Star Wars geek, a Star Trek geek, you name it. And I said, this is a really cool man cave you've got up here. When man caves were really becoming a thing. And I said, well, I want to start a podcast. Would you like to podcast with me? And I said, man cave, and it would be digital. And we had different little taglines, like we were the kings of the digital revolution. We weren't, but it was cool. It was just something to say, something to do. And I got better with composing the podcast because those podcasts on the Digital Man Cave, they were an hour to 2 hours sometimes. I mean, I think we did a 3-hour podcast one time, and that may have been for the finale. But anyway, I would drive up to his house, and he lived a little bit of ways, so it was hard to get in episodes on a consistent basis. And I had to drag my big laptop. I think it was a Dell. It was a gaming computer, had a subwoofer and everything. It was badass for its time, and it makes a great doorstop now. But so I would just go up there, and we would just have fun, and we'd record an episode, and we'd do rock band and fun things like that. And I've had different friends join in, and different people we've tried on the podcast and on Digital Man Cave, and my friend, he went by the name Chaos, and a good friend, Steven, and he was part of the podcast, Digital Man Cave, I think from like the 14th episode to a little bit later down the line. So it was just really a really good mix of people on the podcast. And so, we talk about stuff, and then I learned about Skype down the line. I don't remember what the time period was, because that was a while back. And we were able to I didn't have to travel everywhere. It was kind of rudimentary, but I could put all that together and using software, and it cost me nothing more than, a hosting service, which was $20. I think it's about what I pay now for Libsyn, which if you don't do Libsyn, you ought to, because they're pretty good, and they've really improved their site and, a lot of things over the years, obviously. But we were at another hosting service before then that cost a different amount of money, and Moonfruit, I'm just remembering it now, and doesn't exist anymore, but we were there for a while, and we were on Libsyn, and eventually got everything moved over to Libsyn. And then the podcast eventually, we got to about 8 years later. 6 years. It was 8 years. Okay. Math is not my strong suit, okay? Anybody who knows me will know that's true, but we're talking 2008. So in 2014, about 6 years ago, yes. Actually, we ended it, I think, on September 8th. And the same day I launched the Geek Homeworld. Now, in between that, I was doing, I think for a while, doing Digital Man Cave and another podcast that I did with my wife. And we didn't do that many episodes. We had a very big following. We still have people that are interested in it. And we would take famous quotes or something relative, and we would expound on those words and like their meanings. And it sounds boring, but it was actually not. I was more the comic relief. My wife, Cheryl, she came up with most of it, I must admit. She was really the brains behind the unit there, behind the Quotables podcast, which you can also find on iTunes, the Quotables. And so I did the Quotables while I was doing Digital Man Cave. So I was running 2 podcasts towards the end there. And then in 2014, we ended the Quotables. And then as soon as we ended Digital Man Cave, we ended it not as it being the end of the podcast or anything, but it was the end of that podcast, but it was more a continuation of the Geek Homeworld. Was a sleeker, shorter version, more focused than Digital Man Cave was. We still have the friends on the podcast, and they'd come and go, and they would be on when they could, or Skype in, or whatever. And we had some great highlights on the Digital Man Cave podcast, but it was kind of all over the place. It really wasn't scripted whatsoever. There's no way you could say it was scripted. I was super excited, and so excited to just be podcasting and to be part of that community of podcasters. And I was just excited beyond belief. So, I would just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, kind of like I'm doing now, but I'm supposed to, because that's what I'm doing. And we reined it in with Geek Homeworld. So we came up with, my wife helped me develop a shorter, more concise thing. Now, if you listen to our last episode 68, our summer movie review for the summer of 2017, the summer that wasn't in the movie industry, one of the worst movie summers, box office wise at least. There were some gems in there, but a lot of duds at the box office, but just underperforming movies for whatever reason. And anyway, in that one, I broke the mold on that. That's our longest episode. It's about an hour and 15 minutes long. So, but I have a good friend of mine, Scott, on there. We just broke down the whole summer, the movies in our top list. So you want to check out episode 68 of Geek Homeworld. And like I said, we're geekhomeworld.libsyn.com. You can look for Geek Homeworld on iTunes also. And we've got on Twitter, we're at Geek Homeworld. You can check us out there. We also have a Facebook page. Just look for Geek Homeworld on Facebook. So we're also on Google Plus, and we have a Blogspot page, geekhomeworld.blogspot.com. So you can check out our blog when we decide to blog on there. And my friend Scott is our entertainment correspondent. He's blogged on there before, so you can check that out if you want to. But anyway, so we had Digital Man Cave from 2008 to 2014. Towards the end of Digital Man Cave's reign, we also had the Quotables that I did, podcasts. And then Geek Homeworld started in 2014. Now, we didn't put out our first episode till I think it started September 8th, 2014. And I did a little promo thing, and I was still working out the kinks. And then I had some personal tragedies in my life. And so life interferes. And when, life happens, as it does to all of us. And so I was able to get things going again, actually get the podcast. It took almost a year to get the podcast up and running. So we had a few little promos in 2014, and never did I intend it to go as long as it did. But once we got to around June of 2015, we were rocking and rolling pretty much every week. Now, we've missed some weeks here and there. There have been things like hurricane evacuations and deaths and different things that have, like I said, life gets in the way, getting married, a lot of other things. So, I try to podcast when I can. And generally speaking, I'm trying to keep it on usually a week basis. We usually come out Sundays at 10 p.m. Eastern is when we release episodes of the Geek Homeworld podcast. I've not done well on keeping with that schedule. Like I've said, I'm a sound mixer now, working movies, and I've worked a lot of weekends on a lot of different movies. And you can check me out on IMDb. I'm on there. I've got some creds on there from some of the movies that I've done. Not all of them yet, but it's coming. So that's my new direction. I'm a sound mixer professionally, and I'm also a podcaster. So I'm always probably going to podcast because I always feel I have something to say. And forgive me if this episode goes a little bit longer than the 30 minutes I usually have the episodes, because I like them nice and neat, like we said. Just so you can listen in your car, or go walk around the lake, or go jogging and throw on your headset and listen to us, or you're on your lunch break, you want to digest what we've got to say. And we certainly love your feedback. Geek Homeworld on Twitter. If you want to hit us up, that's probably the best way to do that. You can leave comments on the website. It lives in. Just leave good ones because we don't like anything negative. No. I'm always looking for guest hosts, people that are interesting, people that are in the movie industry, especially, and even especially podcasters too. Would love to score with some of my heroes in the field, some interviews with them, and I just got to work that out. There's some people I've planned to have on the podcast, but I've had a lot going on, and like I said, life gets in the way, but you got to deal with life first before you deal with all the other stuff. But I'm so excited that we've made it to 3 years on September 8th, 2017. And I look forward to what year number 4 is going to bring us. It's amazing. Even the production quality has increased. And just with my knowledge, just learning. And, there's been a lot of YouTube videos I've watched. There's been a lot of podcasts I've listened to. And I've learned. And I'm no innovator in that sense, but, I know a lot because I've done it for 10 years, and September 8th of 2018 will be 10 years that I've been podcasting. And so if this podcast is still going on, then I'm sure I'm going to do maybe something big to celebrate that. I want to thank all the listeners, and the feedback has been wonderful that we've had. Just some rounded up numbers here. We've had about 33,000 downloads on Geek Homeworld since its inception in 2014. Now, some of you are probably laughing at that, and you're probably like, oh my gosh, I've had 1 million, I've had whatever. Or, maybe you haven't had close to that. Well, social media is a big part of it, and last month, August, we had about 9,600 downloads. Now, I know there's people that probably get 10,000, 20, 30,000, and you probably make $10 million a year podcasting, but, we're small. We do this for fun. This is more a love of the art of podcasting and actually getting a message across and speaking with a community of people, of like-minded individuals. And even, when I say like-minded, I mean, I don't mean just people that think the same way, and that is what like-minded means, but I mean, people about podcasting, like-minded podcasters. But, we welcome any points of view. So we're doing really well here on the podcast, and like August numbers blew me away. We have a worldwide audience, and this is really the first podcast that's had us. The Quotables had a pretty good international listenership, and Geek Homeworld we're biggest, of course, in the United States here, where we're situated, but our second biggest audience is France. There are a lot of French geeks, so vive la French geeks. We have a special episode for that too. And we have a lot of diverse things. And just so, if you don't know, if you run into me and I think you're interesting enough and you start geeking out with me, if I'm like meet you, I have business cards, and I'll probably hand you one and say, here, why don't you check out our podcast, or hey, maybe you'd like to be a guest on our podcast. I'd love to talk to you. So let me tell you what we're about. Geek Homeworld is a podcast following superheroes, sci-fi, and action adventure movies. And our little tagline that we have is, a little bite off the Star Wars A New Hope. You'll never find a more awesome hive of fans and geekery. And I always say thanks for listening, because I think you should be kind to others. That's another thing too. If you in the industry I'm in now, I see meet all kinds of different people in the movie industry, and it's terribly exciting. It really is. It's so awesome. I wish everybody was working in the movie industry. And I meet so many wonderful professional people, and people that are getting their start, and they may not be there yet, but you know what? They're working hard. And even if they're doing smaller features, film shorts, they're working their butts off, and they're doing a great job, and they're, being professional. And so I meet a lot of interesting people that way, and I love meeting new and interesting people. And podcasting's that way too. And I haven't reached out as much in the community, the podcasting community, as I'd like to. there are seminars and podcast awards. We've never been nominated for anything because I haven't really submitted the podcast for anything, but a lot of it's about production value, but a lot of it's about your audience and that feedback. And, it's not just me talking to a microphone, talking to a recorder, talking to my computer or whatever. It's also the feedback that I get from our community. So with all the downloads we've had a lot of good feedback and a lot of good shout outs from people on Twitter. So I do appreciate all of the feedback and input that our audience gives to us. And what's the future look like? Well, like I said, we're on YouTube. We don't really do anything with the YouTube channel. Hint, hint. So I'm looking at somebody to work on that. So I'm trying to figure some different ways we can do it. I may eventually go to the whole video podcasting thing. I'll still always do the audio podcast here, but I may start, doing some Facebook Lives. Those are some things I was going to do. Now you'll notice, and actually the last couple episodes, I did not realize this, episode 66, 67, and 68, I was in such a hurry at the different times I was putting those episodes out that I forgot to put the music, just to, I've done this for almost 10 years and never made this mistake, ever. But I forgot to put the intros and the outros that I have in there, just have a whole workflow, and just like 3 separate times on those last 3 episodes. For some reason, I just was so exciting to get them out. I forgot to put the little intros and the outros and all that. So I'm sure you'll forgive us for that. But maybe you hadn't noticed, or if you're new to the podcast and you go back to some of them, you're like, oh, they got this interesting intro and they've got an outro and all that. Well, here's another little clue in our outro. I did mention our Mixler chats. Well, I did try the Mixler chats, but I may go back to that, but it really wasn't what I wanted. And I'm about doing this for as free as possible. I will invest some more money into it when the money comes, but if you want to send me money, that's fine. That's certainly your choice. But, money does dictate a lot of things, and there are priorities in life that you have to, especially when you're married and you're paying bills and doing everything else and just trying to make a living. You have to think of your priorities first, and that's what's important. Don't ever give up on your dreams, and I'm not saying any of you are, but never give up on your dreams. Always believe in what you can do and go beyond what you think you can achieve, because the sky is totally not the limit. You can go higher than the sky, okay? So in saying that, we're going to have in the future, and I'm not sure when, and I'm not putting timetables on this. I'm not putting any extra stress upon myself to meet a deadline, but if you want it as a community, we can start doing I may on the Facebook, the Geek Homeworld Facebook thing, I may do a Facebook Live maybe as we're recording. Yes, other podcasts do that. There's one that I watch that does questions and answers, and that's still totally possible. I'm not saying no to that. So, I just got to work on my setup here and decide how I want to do it. And those are some fun technical things that I have to work out. So, like I said, so I'm always open to ideas, and this and that. And I do have some people that have requested to come on the podcast, and I've got to get to and get them on. And so exciting things are coming. So anyway, I'm not going to bore you to death anymore. This probably isn't the episode you were looking for, but it's the one you deserve. And like I said, we started, it's so funny because we would, I think on Digital Man Cave, we would go, why so serious? We just were so into the Dark Knight, and then it was amazing. But we talked about a lot of things, and I just always say thanks for listening. So it's whatever it is. So whatever your passion is, if it's music, if it's working in the movie industry, if it's, cameras, lighting, grip, sound, if it's podcasting, whatever it is, if it's writing, if it's singing, pursue it. Pursue that passion that you have for that thing that you love to do. And I'm lucky, and I've been blessed enough, and years of hard work I've been put in to get me where I'm at. And is this where I want to end up? well, this is just another step along the way. I don't really look at it as a destination. I look at it as the journey, and you have to enjoy the journey while you're going through the journey, while you're going down the road. You want to look around and you want to enjoy, and you want to make sure you treat people right and that people are treating you right and they're not taking advantage of you, and you're all working towards common goals, that are fulfilling to you artistically and otherwise. So anyway, happy 3-year anniversary, 2014, 15, 16, 17. Yep, 3 years, September 8th, 2017, of the Geek Homeworld podcast. And thank you so much. Check us out on Twitter. Like I said, hit us up there and go on our Facebook page, Geek Homeworld on Facebook, and like the page, subscribe to it. Go on iTunes and you can subscribe to the podcast, and whenever we put a new episode out, you know how it works. I don't have to explain this to you. You know how to do this stuff. Anyway, spread the word about Geek Homeworld and tell your friends, and go to Hollywood and call up your agent and say, hey, you got to hear this guy. Ed, and, he's so great. Yeah, and hire him as your sound mixer too for your movie production. Shameless plug time, okay? Thank you so much. I am so incredibly grateful to have this opportunity to do this, a hobby that's a fun thing to do that hopefully will be even more lucrative in the future. Hint, hint, insert dollar signs. And I'm going to continue to give you my best on podcasting, and I've got an opinion about everything. I'm looking forward to, well, in movies, what am I looking forward to? The Last Jedi, obviously. And there's some other stuff, Justice League I'm looking towards, Thor Ragnarok. And yeah, I know we're heavy on reviewing movies here on the podcast, but we talk about other things like action adventure movies. We talk about sometimes TV series and different things. And we talk about some philosophical things too. So I challenge you. This is what I ask, and what I kind of challenge you to do is to go through our back catalog here. And we've got, this will be the 69th episode of the podcast. But as we go forward in time, and even now, go back and check out some of the earlier episodes, and you can laugh along with us. Some of them are dated because of, things and events and all that. But it's interesting to go back and listen what I thought of something one time, and then to go now and see how my thought progression has changed. So you can have fun with that. So don't be afraid to go and listen at your leisure to a lot of our back episodes. We've been having a lot of that lately. So a lot of people checking us out for the first time, and then, just seeing what we're about. So anyway, welcome to the Geek Homeworld, and I thank you so much for 3 wonderful years, and here's to the future. And thanks for listening. Goodbye. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Geek Homeworld podcast with your host, SavageTechman. You can find us on Libsyn, Google+, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, listen to us on iTunes, see us on YouTube, be part of our Mixler chats. Thank you. See you again on the Geek Homeworld podcast.